We're just going to wait a few minutes to see if we've got some more of our registrants signing on, and we'll be starting soon. I can see that we've got a number of our registrants have now signed up. There's still more coming, but in the lack of time that we have today, only an hour, I'd like to get us going. So I want to start off by saying Happy Earth Week, everyone. It's refreshing to see such a large number of participants today. The TCA's Free Pathway to Sustainability webinar series is intended to keep the TCA members informed while introducing a conduit for communication and collaboration as we move towards net zero. With this initial session, our panelists will be exploring what building to net zero means to the construction industry in the Greater Toronto Area. In the fall, we'll follow up with additional sessions such as building infrastructure projects to net zero and net zero, the low-hanging fruit and beyond. With only an hour available to cover a vast extent of material, our panelists will try their best to address the questions added to the Q&A box, with any unanswered questions addressed following the webinar. Today, I'm honored to introduce our esteemed panelists who are on the forefront of the movement towards net zero. Duncan McLennan is a certified energy manager in the City of Toronto's Environment and Climate Division. Duncan is responsible for the existing building programs supporting the City of Toronto's objective to reach net zero by 2040. Prior to the City of Toronto, Duncan has worked in the conservation departments at Toronto Hydro and other utilities across the GTAA. Christina Grimes is a member of the Ontario Association of Architects and is an associate with Perkins & Will, a global architectural and design practice. Supporting a more sustainable future, Christina thrives on collaborative design, with her satisfaction lying in the evolution of a concept where all project stakeholders and users work closely to formulate a design that transforms challenges into opportunities. Phoebe Cullingham is a graduate from Concordia University, their building engineering program. Phoebe is a climate and sustainability specialist at Ellis Dawn. Like Christina, Phoebe is working collaboratively with owners, designers, project teams, and operators to achieve high-performance buildings that benefit the climate and occupants with low or no operational embodied carbon. The most important thing to start today is, what is net zero? What does it mean? Our focus is net zero carbon. It's a term which is generally used today by the regulating bodies moving towards the targets necessary to make a significant and lasting change. It's the balance between the amount of greenhouse gas produced and the amount removed from the atmosphere. That is, reducing the amount of carbon produced through the construction and life cycle of the building and offsetting the remainder. This is not to be confused with a whole host of other terms, such as those listed here, issues which may well be the topic of future discussions. As we move towards net zero, Collaboration between all parties is the key. While much of the technology is not new, close attention must be paid to the availability of funding to all sectors in support of changes required to address the movement towards net zero. Development of design and labor force required to meet the targeted goals. Development of economical options. Ramping up of manufacturers, ensuring required products are readily available. And development of solutions which are dependable and backed up by dependable energy supply sources. With that, I'd like to turn over to Duncan, who's going to tell us what's happening with the City of Toronto.
Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome. I'm Duncan with the City of Toronto. As you may have noticed, I am wearing the same sweater as my in my profile picture at the start. I try and keep everything consistent in everything I do, pretty clearly. Going to tell you a little bit of what's going on at the City of Toronto. I'll do it as quickly as possible so we can get to some of the burning questions. At the city, we have the Environment and Climate Division. Within that division, we have a couple of different teams that focus on different areas. Two of which really speak to the Toronto Construction Association and the people who are members of it. So one of them would be our new buildings and new development team. So many of you may be familiar with the Toronto Green Standard. That's for all new buildings and buildings that require a site plan approval for it. And we keep ratcheting up the standards for that as time goes by. So I believe we're on standard version 4 right now. So that team deals with everything that goes on there. They also deal with district energy projects. My team deals with existing buildings, and what we've really focused on in the last little while is our net zero existing building strategy. We're kind of done the planning stages and we're into the implementation stages. And within the implementation stages, there are really 3 pillars and prongs that we are focusing on. And those are I like to call them the carrot, the stick, and the microphone. So we've got a bunch of support programs. So the carrot, so whether that be financing, whether that be support, engineering support, different types of programs that we offer through the City of Toronto. The second piece is the stick. So what we're doing is we're developing mandatory policies for existing buildings in the City of Toronto. Those will start with benchmarking and auditing requirements and move to a building performance requirement with carbon and emissions. And then the third piece is the microphone. So that's our advocation and education piece. So where we advocate different levels of government to be on the same page, make sure that we can harmonize some of these ideas across all the different levels. And then the education, building up the workforce. So talking with different organizations and how we can train people, how we can get more people into the workforce and bring them up. Sandra, could I have the next page?
Yep.
So this is kind of an idea of where we're at. This is our pathway to net zero. Originally, City Council asked us to get to net zero as a city as a whole by 2050, and then they moved it back to 2040 about a year and a bit ago. So this is the trend that we're on. We just got our 2020 numbers in there, and we're about to add them to this graph as well, but they're slightly below. It might be a little bit different due to pandemic pieces, but we have hit our 2020 target. Now, that being said, this is mostly a lot of the low-hanging fruit that's happening. A lot of the work that we have to go forward on is going to be a lot tougher and a lot harder. So what we're really hoping is to get a lot of support of the industry, a lot of support of building owners, and everybody pulling in the same direction. Sandra, do I have one more?
Nope, that's it for the moment.
Yeah, so that's the general idea of where the city is going, and we're aiming to lead by example. So all of our procurement practices are moving to low or no carbon within within our building and our construction, and our capital planning team has taken that on. They have a dedicated internal team within there to bring these projects to light. So yeah, if there's any questions on at the end, we'll be sending out an email, but I'd love to chat with anybody who wants to talk any further. That's it for me for right now, Sandra.
Thanks, Duncan. So Christina, how is Perkins and Will facilitating the advancement of net zero buildings?
Okay, so we're doing a few things differently now than I would say we were doing a couple years ago. Basically, for every project, we're essentially coming to the table net zero ready, I'd call it. So regardless of a client's net zero ambitions on day one, we'll bring to the table a net zero strategy, showing what needs to be implemented into the design to achieve it. We try to make it as easy as possible for the clients to say yes to net zero. And if they're not ready to say yes to net zero on day one, we start to discuss what needs to come into the base design, what the base design can incorporate for them to then transition to net zero in the future. So, you know, one example could be no client wants to be changing out their entire mechanical system 10 years down the road. A better long-term strategy is to invest in that more efficient heat pump system on day one, and then make it easier to install, let's say, photovoltaics down the road that can help bring that building to net zero in the future. I would also say our base design is becoming much more of a robust thermally design. So for the building envelope, regardless of the sustainability targets, we're going to be targeting pretty effective R25 walls, R40 roofs, and working with envelope consultants to kind of ensure our detailing from parapet down to foundation is airtight, and that we're reducing that building energy consumption as much as we possibly can through the passive means if the active systems aren't able to be implemented for that project.
Wonderful. How about you, Phoebe? What's happening at Ellis Dawn?
Yeah, so Ellis Dawn has committed to reducing our scopes 1, 2, and 3 emissions by 40% over our 2019 baselines by 2030. And considering that we as a company have pretty lofty growth projections in that time, I just want to say that this is like an absolute target. So regardless of the growth, we will be 41% below our 2019 emissions. And right now, this we just received, I think, notification that our targets have been verified by the Science Based Targets Initiative. So, you know, we do have kind of third-party checks going on there. Additionally to kind of those public commitments that we made, my team, which is the Sustainable Building Solutions team at Ellis Dawn, is collaborating with business units across the country and our units across the world as well to help them evaluate and minimize their carbon impact in our own operations and our construction. I'm actually in Ottawa, but I'm in Toronto today. We just had our departmental AGM yesterday, and for all of our services, and you know, we were really echoing how important sustainability is across all of the various business units, even if it's not their primary focus, right? My team also develops a lot of training that we provide to project teams and just kind of more generally. And this helps them empower them to include meaningful sustainability, you know, into their work. And we provide additional support to teams where needed. Beyond projects and construction, Ellis Dawn is working closely with industry to facilitate the implementation of low carbon solutions and next gen materials, including developing our own solutions. We currently have an active partnership with Dialogue for a hybrid timber floor that we've patented in quite a few countries, and it's going through testing right now in BC. They just shipped it out there. And we are measuring our actual construction, which is the A2 and A3 impacts emissions on quite a few pilot projects around the country.
Fabulous. So here's a question for all three of you. How are you integrating the evolving advancement of science and technology into your corporate plan? Duncan?
Yeah, so there's kind of two pieces that we're doing. On the corporate side for our own buildings, what we're doing is we're always learning and finding different ideas and different things to try out, because we think that the city does need to be a little bit on the forefront and leading by example. But one of the things that we're also doing is allowing the market to tell us what is needed. So we've been really working to do outcome-based contracting. So where we say we need our building to reduce 80% carbon in this renewal plan. What are your proposals? And so those have been in a lot of the RFPs that have been put out for low carbon buildings within the city. In terms of on the program side, what we're always trying to do is take funding and direct it towards the new projects that are happening, that are really showing and showcasing what can be done in the market. So part of it is showcasing it in case studies, and then the other part is using programs like the GMAP program at the City of Toronto, where it's called the Green Market Acceleration Program, if I can get the acronym right. And it's by our economic development group, and what they do is they look to showcase new technology pieces on city buildings that haven't had a real they're conceptual ideas, but they haven't had a venue to promote what they're doing.
Fabulous. Christina?
Okay, so, research is a pretty big part of Perkins and Will. We have about 7 different research labs that continually develop expertise on a variety of subjects: material health, energy, resiliency. And we also try to kind of continually improve upon our BIM best practices. So with BIM now, we're working with more data throughout design than we ever have before. And we want to try to use this data as much as possible to inform design. So one area we've seen this most recently is with the embodied carbon analysis. So the use of Revit plugins to be able to approximate the embodied carbon of a building. And we're testing a variety of these plugins to see how we can be extracting embodied carbon information earlier in the design process, so then it can help inform the decisions. One example on decisions on structural design, which has a huge impact on the embodied carbon. I would kind of, on the flip side, like to put out there that, the science and tech conversations around net zero can also often make it feel a bit intimidating, I would say. So we're not currently really waiting for a breakthrough for net zero when it comes to science and tech. From a building perspective, the tools to create a net zero building are, they're not new, and really every building can be net zero moving forward. The real challenges preventing it can be around policy and investment. So just trying to, when we speak to clients on net zero, we're trying to take away that intimidation factor, I guess, on the science and technology behind it.
Now, when you say embodied carbon emissions, perhaps some of the audience might like a little description of that.
Yeah, so the embodied carbon is basically the carbon used in the construction of the building. So whereas when you talk about net zero emissions, it's often related, well, there's 2 factors: the operating carbon, so the carbon you use to heat and cool the building. Embodied carbon is what's involved with the actual construction of the building. And so everything from the transportation and the manufacturing of all the materials that go into build that building. Excellent.
How about you, Phoebe?
Yeah, so Elliston has a bit of a slogan. I don't know how much we use it externally, but we have a team for that. And so within our infrastructure services and technology department that I'm part of, or our construction sciences team and our building material science team, which is below that, we have a huge, vast amount of expertise around the company that we really, invest in. And personally, I like spending time with these people because they're generally unabashed nerds who just really like to study stuff. My team, the Sustainable Building Solutions, we're working with these other groups to evaluate new technologies. And, working with the creators to determine the capacity to bring them onto our projects. These might be technologies that are like data driven, they might be physical materials, they might be, construction methodology, whatever it is, we're interested in implementing it. And we want to make sure that these solutions are also getting the fair consideration against conventional legacy solutions, right? We see a lot of people twisting themselves in knots to make certain mechanical systems work, or, oh, can we do a single glaze if we do, or like a double glaze if we do this in the envelope elsewhere? We have to put the same effort into the more performance solutions as well, make the money work, and put that same effort into it. Elliston is also actively engaged in various industry working groups and committees to advance sustainability in policy, design, and procurement. All of our documents that we produce are working documents, really, and we have a very transparent internal culture that encourages people from all over the company to reach out if they have questions. Like, we're literally here to support them, and we love working with people and answering their questions, and also, participating in panels like this.
Excellent. So we talk about collaboration and development of integrated solutions. How are the owners, designers, and contractors contributing to the process? Particularly, Duncan, I heard that you said you're looking in your RFP for some solutions and how they're working on it. Do you have anything to add to this, Duncan?
Yeah, I think one of the key things is just when we do our RFPs and when we go looking for a vendor, we are really looking for that integrated solution, and really the life cycle costing is something that has changed over the last few years. It's not just the cost to build it, it's the maintenance, the operation, like kind of everything all at once. And it's not just looking at the cost of that, it's also looking at the environmental cost of it. It's looking at the carbon cost of that going forward and how that's going to project out, especially as you see the price of carbon going up. But yeah, I'd love to hear from the other two. I think they probably have a great handle on it.
Christina?
Yeah, so I would agree with Duncan on the life cycle costs. It's really where we work with our clients now to start evaluating the cost of the building over its life cycle, and really encourage them to kind of look at construction budgets and operating budgets as one. And so example I can pull from this is we worked with the City of Toronto on the new Northeast Scarborough Community Center. It's currently under construction, targeting net zero energy and emissions. And before getting approval for the net zero design, we did a feasibility study that kind of came up with a menu of passive and active design strategies that allow the building to achieve net zero. And part of that final analysis was the inclusion of net present values over a 20-year and 30-year timeline, which essentially identifies the system's payback period. So rethinking the budget and considering construction budget and operation budget as one was a needed shift for the city in determining their return on investment they will get by proceeding with the net zero design now. I would say another layer to this discussion is the possibility for future net zero retrofitting. So every client that's building today really needs to consider the retrofit cost impact in the future that could very well be mandated prior to expiration of installed equipment, such as the mechanical system. So making it clear that to clients that it's much more economical, to build a net zero building on day one than have to transition, down the road in 10 to 20 years later.
Excellent. How about you, Phoebe?
Man, the issue with going third is that everybody's already said my points. So obviously I agree with everything that Duncan and Christina have said. I just want to, add a little bit to say that there's a common misconception that green buildings are more expensive, right? And plenty of analysis has shown that the actual construction premium, when we're not trying to get a Cadillac, right? Not every green building needs to be the most fancy building ever. You can have a high performance standard building, right? But previously it has just been kind of showy buildings, and we need it to become more the norm. So we see very low premiums, like 1 to 5%. for construction costs for a lot of low carbon solutions, and that isn't without considering the decreased operating costs. As I said, like some items might be more expensive in one line item too. Like a heat pump is going to be more expensive than a gas furnace or something, but then you have to offset with like, okay, well, do I have to have all of the ductwork in the building? And you have to really look line item by line item, because you might get sticker shock from one thing. And it really, when you do the full evaluation, it pans out to like not be so bad, right? Items like air infiltration rates, Christina did mention it earlier with all the detailing from the foundation to the parapet is important. And when we consider that early in design, we can have massive savings on both operational energy, but also materials, right? If your effective R, you're targeting 20, and you know you can get that low infiltration rate, you can put less insulation in your wall, and that material saving really adds up over a large building. That being said, for the designers to know that that infiltration rate is actually going to be met, there needs to be a great deal of trust with the contractors doing the work. There needs to be Q&A plans early on. There needs to be, you know, all of those testing plans. And so there needs to be a good amount of collaboration there. And I think what Duncan was saying with operating costs and projecting out, we are seeing a lot of our large institutional clients already requiring that future cost of carbon to be included. And I think the federal government is up to $300 a ton now. Like it's pretty heavy. And so we're trying to bring this perspective to all of our projects to make the realistic payback periods and operating cost projections.
Excellent.
Just I have a quick come
yeah.
back in here. Sorry, what I like what both of them said. Christina said something about you know, the future cost of retrofit, and I think that that's so key because of how long equipment their life cycle is. I mean, as if you're doing something now, it's still going to be in place when our 2040 mandates hit. So as stuff comes up for renewal, that's your most cost-effective way to change how you're doing the systems, to change how you're heating, cooling your building, and to change how your building skinning is, kind of all those different pieces.
If you're doing an envelope refurbishment or something now, you better be looking at high performance envelope, because they have a 30-year lifespan, and that's going to bring you to 2050.
Yeah, good point. So Christina, from a design perspective, what's considered the lowest hanging fruit and or the biggest bang for your buck?
I mean, I think Duncan said it earlier, there aren't really any low-hanging fruits anymore. It doesn't seem like it. If it's easy to do, it's likely being done. Things that are easier for us to do in a building design are really around the building envelope, those passive strategies to make, you know, reduce energy consumption as much as you can by having that kind of robust envelope around the building without even looking at active systems to begin with. On the other side of what we're kind of seeing sometimes on the client side that feels like a difficult hurdle and could be something that, you know, we should start addressing, or some of the, and I'd like to hear Duncan's perspective on this, are some of the silos that seem to still exist within municipalities and on the client side, you know, trying to collapse some of those what feel like artificial boundaries between the sustainability group, the operations group, the building user groups, to have a more cohesive and productive discussion on the building's net zero ambitions. So, you know, we always hope that prior to the architect being hired, the entire client group, which is often a municipality for our work, is kind of united and clear on the project ambitions, working cohesively to achieve it. This is rarely the case, and it often can become our job to sift through competing requirements to build that net zero case that, you know, everyone can get on board with, including the kind of operations team. So, you know, when there's clear policy and mandate for net zero, the conversation changes and everyone is working towards a clear goal. When it's vague and kind of more unclear policy, it becomes a more muddled conversation and often has these competing objectives. So I'd love to see those silos and those divisions start to collapse a little bit more.
I also find it's interesting in terms of when projects are now being estimated. This is a huge component for the upfront collaboration and design. Duncan, do you find that those budgets are being integrated, that estimates are being included for this upfront work?
Can I actually pass that one to Phoebe?
Yeah, okay.
Because I'm not as much on that pricing, that estimating side, and I think she probably would have a little bit more, and I can talk later about the silos and
Sure.
stuff that I was asked
Yep.
about.
Okay.
Yeah, I work pretty closely with our estimators. They can be a pretty insular group, but they do hold the most data, right? And we are, it's moving from kind of like a math-based discipline to having to consider a lot more like future variables. So we are, just to say, like, it is a work in progress. I'm not going to say that at least we are perfect there in terms of estimating, but we are getting involved very early on projects and doing estimating for various options, including operating issues. I think one large project, I don't know if I'm at liberty to say what it is, that we're working on recently, we were out evaluating various structural solutions, and we actually ended up not opting for a timber solution because of incredibly high insurance rates for timber solutions, right? And it was just that this specific building had to have very high fire protection requirements because of the building space. But for other types of buildings, it doesn't mean it's a write-off, that this is not a good thing to be doing. It means that it's possibly more suited to mid-rise residential and office spaces versus cultural institutions or something like that.
I can imagine with the design build that you've got a lot more control in that, because you're doing your design and you've got to put in a number, an estimate up front, but then you can make sure you've got a pot of money to work with. I think it's really important for owners to recognize this is a new world and this is a new line item in a budget that needs to be provided for up front. And the question is, of course, is that something that government funding is available to help with, or now all the municipalities and owners expected to just have this additional cost now included in their project? And if they haven't, then I get a little concerned we're not going to get the level of collaboration that's needed up front.
Yeah, I can address kind of one of those questions, and I would like to answer the low-hanging fruit one very briefly. But in terms of, I don't know that design builds are necessarily easier than a CM model. We are getting brought on very early in design stages at this point, and we're providing, estimating data there. I'm not going to remember the actual term, but the federal government does currently have a policy where they will provide funding to do all the sustainability feasibility studies, right? They won't provide money for the actual construction, but anything that you can show was money that went towards net zero feasibility stuff. There are programs for that. So that is, just trying to get people over the ledge there. Just touching very briefly on that low-hanging fruit, also agreed that low-hanging fruit is pretty much gone. If you're a building operator listening to this and you haven't switched to LEDs, like, get on it, right? Like, that's kind of a gone by solution, I think, or bygone solution. Christina mentioned improving envelope function. That's critical. And the real benefit of doing that is when you have a higher functioning envelope, you can have a lower size mechanical system. So don't go be changing over your mechanical systems right now for a building that's going to have 2 times the load when you do upgrade that envelope system, right? So, like, if you're in a position to prioritize your envelope right now, that's the next logical step. If you can put in a system where there's like staged things, where now you have your primary heat pump, and then you have a backup boiler, and then maybe when you do your envelope, you can rip out that backup furnace, like gas boiler. That is a possible option, but really envelope priority number 1, I'd say.
And what about all these buildings that are all glass?
They're pretty until they get dirty. And then I just think of when you don't make your whole building glass, I mean, your window washing bill is going to go down too, right? Like, you got to look at all the operating costs here.
Yeah,
Yeah, I totally agree with Phoebe on that in terms of the answer to the low hanging fruit question. We've always, a lot of building owners have always operated under, hey, where's the payback threshold? What are you going to do if it's under 3 years, if it's under 2 years, if it's kind of under those pieces, and do those types of projects where you take a look at some of these low carbon projects and the paybacks are way above thresholds, right? So as you take a look at a building holistically, you can't just pick that low hanging fruit, and you can't just pick those pieces. So if you're doing here, as Phoebe just said, an LED project might actually have a payback period of in months rather than in years. If you pair that with something that is a longer payback, say 20 years, you sometimes can get it below your thresholds. So taking a look at the building holistically, I think the question isn't necessarily what are the lowest hanging fruits? How can we do them? I think the question is, how can we pair some of those easy, no-brainer projects with some of the harder ones that we know we will have to do down the line, so that they're more palatable for management, for investors, for a lot of people who have to say yes to those projects. I think that's one of the biggest key things in doing entire building retrofits and taking a look at your capital plan, is how can you make some of those pairings, make it so that it makes sense. So building envelope and then mechanical, and then how can you make sure that that lines up with your state of good repair. That's going to be your greatest planning feature you've got. Now, the answer to the silo question, that's always the fun one that we get on the municipal side, is how can you talk to your different departments better? How can you make it all click? I totally agree. And what we're exploring kind of two different angles that we're trying to integrate within the city as well. So one of them is having specific liaisons that go to different departments. So for example, if somebody's not able to do a retrofit for energy because of some heritage designation, we're trying to figure out, how do you work with heritage on that? How do you work with permitting on that? How do you work with the different departments on that? And then number two is we're just about to launch our internal training program, that's our climate lens. So what it is we're putting every person in the city of Toronto through some sort of climate training, depending on what department they're in and depending on what their job function is, and have it modularly changed for those pieces. So if you're anyone from operating cutting grass at the city and parks and forestry, to running a community center, to operating some of our corporate owned buildings, everybody will go through climate lens training, and then that will be inputted into their performance plans. So there will be some sort of performance piece in there. And as we've all seen, people generally don't do something until they're measured on it. So that's what we're doing internally, as well as pushing that out to the general public with our benchmarking and reporting pieces. So I hope that answered those questions. I know it takes a while for us to do those things. We've got thousands and thousands of employees, and we aren't the best at talking to each other, but we're working on it.
good to hear. So in terms of, would anybody want to comment on here, the owners and governments, what they can do to facilitate the advancement of the net zero building objectives?
I can take that one first. So I think Duncan mentioned at the very beginning that there's been carrots, there's sticks, and I think he said microphone. And I think we've had a long period of carrots at this point. We've had model buildings, we've had all kinds of things, and we are moving now to the sticks. Toronto's done a really good job with leading with the Toronto Green Standard and building a certain comfort within the construction trades, owners, operators, all of that to get there. We're also seeing new mandatory codes in Vancouver come in for like this summer for embodied carbon calculations on all of their projects. And this is kind of the space where maybe energy modeling was 15 years ago. So there is a lot of kind of upskilling required and growing of capacity that's needed. And it's good that it's kind of being sprinkled across the country, because we know in the next 5 years, this is going to be everywhere. I know we're assuming that TGS, version 5 or whatever will be coming out in 2025. And at least if it's the same as the tier 2 is now, there are embodied carbon at least reporting requirements on that one. So governments can lead by example. And this is seen, in municipalities beyond Toronto as well. I mentioned Vancouver, where I live in Ottawa. They're introducing a reporting, basically a TGS light, I like to call it, coming into force this summer. And we've also seen our federal government projects, as well as our health system partners. So, all the big hospitals are building around Ontario, really have pretty boundary pushing requirements in their design. And it's creating that, I don't want to say sandbox, so it's a bit more serious than that, but it is creating a training ground within large institutional infrastructure projects for that kind of development of those skills across the entire industry. Additionally, we've seen significant investment in low carbon building solutions from the USA in their Inflation Reduction Act, kind of a misnomer. It was just a green policy they passed. And I've been participating in some of the work that them and the EPA have been doing to provide feedback, because we know if something's happening in the States, like, it's going to trickle over to Canada. So staying involved in that. And then the new federal budget that was just presented a couple weeks ago had a lot of green solutions in there as well. So the money's there, right? They've been putting a lot of money where their mouth is at this point. It's up to the industry to kind of pick up the ball. But just one final thing on kind of governments, particularly, I guess, at the federal level. We need to make sure that our codes and requirements are kind of cross-national, right? Let's not duplicate our efforts. Let's make sure that they're working on it, like the ISO standards for reporting and stuff, but people don't want to learn 3 different versions of almost the same thing. If I don't know, gypsum board manufacturer in the state is making an EPD, let's make sure that EPD can be used in Canada as well, for instance, and that's an environmental product declaration for embodied carbon stuff. So like, their job is to do the big policy stuff and make it so that we don't have to like learn 17 versions of the same thing.
Mm-hmm. I think that is a very important point, that when the company's been spending all this money to invest to create products that are going to assist, and then all of a sudden they have to go through an approval process for that product. And we don't have time for that. We need to know that when they're developing something, almost running it in parallel to make sure that, we've got to find these products. This is a lot of buildings we're talking about that we need to address. Does anyone else have anything to comment here?
I can jump in a little bit. I mean, I really agree with Phoebe's take on, well, Toronto Green Standard has just been huge for the city of Toronto, and kind of setting the bar for the expectation for all new buildings and retrofit buildings, which is great. I'd like to see those standards kind of get into the smaller municipalities. Phoebe kind of captured everything from the more widespread lens, zooming in on the building. For each project, we really push clients to be decisive. So there's often a delay, net zero, no net zero, test this, test that. Every time the decision gets delayed, there's more money. With escalation now, projects just become more expensive by the month. So delaying those decisions, delaying those projects, make it become more expensive and then less feasible to kind of make the decision. So that would be something at the project scale that we would kind of push for.
Yeah, on our side, I agree with a bunch of those pieces. One of the biggest challenges that is going to be happening is existing buildings. Yes, the Toronto Green Standard is great for new buildings, but there's so many buildings out there that already exist, and how do we do anything with them, and what are the requirements with them? So that's where we're trying to come in with the existing buildings emission strategy and have those requirements. What that also helps do is it helps enforce some of the Toronto Green Standard pieces that are there, because we're picking up reporting and monitoring a building on an ongoing basis, not just from when it was built. We kind of see it over its lifespan. So that's kind of huge. And we're going to see lots of electrification, and a lot of the big portfolios are looking to electrify their buildings. And one of the big pieces that government can do is help facilitate that on the electrical capacity side, because we're going to need much more electrical capacity on our grid. And that's really a big government piece. That's municipalities working together with the utilities, working together with the province to see how can we expand that capacity. And part of that is people demanding the capacity, saying, I want to look at this, I want to do this, because it's kind of the chicken and the egg thing. We're not going to provide more capacity until people need more. Oh, we're not going to ask for more until there is more capacity, type of thing. So that's how I see we can move that. And then also workforce development capacity. I think there's an opportunity within the province of Ontario to have some sort of a collaboration between post-secondary institutions, industry, and even secondary school. How can we combine that together to get a lot more people into the jobs that are going to be needed? What is the big holes? Because if you're looking for some of those people now, you think it's hard to find some of those people now. If we don't do anything about it, we as the industry, the government, kind of everybody in Ontario, think of what it's going to be in 15 years when the requirements are and people are scrambling to retrofit their buildings.
Yeah. And I would say capacity and dependability. We need to have something that we can depend on. Christina, what can or should I say, what are designers doing to facilitate the advancement of these objectives? I've heard you talk about building envelopes and important things. Do you have anything else to add here?
Yeah, I mean, I would say our biggest role is really to help kind of demystify net zero and make the decision as easy as possible for the clients. So for every project, I think moving forward, we need to bring forward a net zero strategy, listen to what the perceived hurdles are, and kind of give our clients the confidence that those hurdles, can be overcome and probably have already been overcome on previous projects. So referencing back to that Northeast Scarborough Community Center project, we did a feasibility study prior to net zero approval and kind of created this net zero roadmap. So it broke down that net zero target into these incremental strategies that began to make it feel achievable, not only to the client, but really also to us. The project had a pool, which are extremely high energy consumers. So it was a difficult building to get to net zero. And kind of by creating that roadmap, we could then see how much energy and carbon savings was achieved firstly by passive design strategies. Then what could we reduce further with high efficiency active systems, a switch to electric fuel, and then lastly, kind of reviewing the new energy profile of the design and then determining the amount of photovoltaics required to offset the remainder. So now we've got 2 aquatic centers under construction that are CAGBC net zero design certified. And we kind of feel if you can make a pool net zero, you can kind of make any building net zero. So we bring that perspective and that experience to our new projects. And we're trying to push that all of our projects moving forward are net zero, can be net zero. And really the only hurdle that remains is looking at funding and policy and kind of getting everyone on the client side on board to move forward with it. I would also say, kind of to Duncan's perspective, I think architects need to be more of an advocate for adaptive reuse and retrofitting. The new buildings can't solve everything on their own, and we really need to be thinking much more about that. So I'm pretty excited about Duncan's work and what they're pushing forward.
Yay. And Phoebe, what can, or should I say, what are the contractors and subcontractors doing in addition to the items you've been discussing thus far?
Sure. Before I answer that, I'm just going to answer one of the questions in the Q&A I saw, which is, have you seen that rising interest rates are affecting owners and developers payback calculations? Maybe not so much in payback, because I've personally only seen it in new builds up to this point, but yes, we are really unfortunately seeing the rising interest rates hamper some of our clients' ability or desire to do sustainable buildings, or at least to hit certain kind of certifications. What I say, we're still encouraging them to, incorporate some things, but it is hurting it. These are honestly because it's a lot of community housing and kind of community type works that are pursuing these low carbon, zero carbon certifications, and they're operating from a pretty finite pool of money to work with, and they a lot of them can't really go into debt, significant debt either, because they are not-for-profits. One of the issues, and if we have any Federation of Canadian Municipalities or federal government people on the line, part of the issue is that they're not seeing the funding be doled out as reliably as they need it to be. So especially in these rising interest rate times, like, we need this funding that we've been promised to be reliable, because it is, I've seen it impact a couple of projects, and it's a real bummer when that happens, because you spend months advocating for what you consider to be the right thing, only for couple numbers to make it all change. To the question that Sandra asked, so yeah, there's lots of things that constructors, suppliers, and subcontractors can do, and it really is all three of those, because we, as a general contractor or construction manager, really rely on the information and the expertise from our trusted trade partners. So operational energy has largely been the domain of designers in the past, and I think it rightly belongs there, but the performance actually needs to equal those assumptions, right? And that's something that we haven't necessarily always been very good at verifying and maintaining. As I mentioned before, if a low air leakage rate is designed for, the quality of the work needs to meet it, right? That being said, I do think that GCs, CMs, and all of our trade partners provide the greatest value in the embodied carbon space. When brought in early in a project, we provide incredibly valuable data and feedback to designers that ensure that project goals are honestly in line with reality. Accurate material quantities from our estimators and suppliers. Christina mentioned some Revit plugins earlier. Good for very high level stuff, not trustworthy. Revit exports are not trustworthy data, and we're seeing a huge amount of discrepancies in kind of early life cycle analyses versus what we're actually getting from our estimating data. And we need to be working really closely together. And that's a big way I spend my time, is honestly trying to grease those pathways between our estimating teams and our sustainability and design consultants, because the ones estimating, both at our suppliers and our levels, we don't have a huge margin for error, because we need to make money off of having the right amounts of stuff. So our data is quite good, and I want it to be used. And then we also provide real great value in tender and procurement weighting to benefit low carbon options. This is also a work in progress, and it largely depends on how the specifications are written and what the owner wants in terms of a procurement procedure. It actually can be easy to do in public procurement, because everything does generally need to be performance based, which is really how we prefer specifications to be written. So my little request to designers, consultants here: avoid prescriptive specifications unless it's absolutely necessary, and prescription and performance-based specs are far and away better, because it allows us to use our expertise to achieve project requirements, right? There's also, we've been hearing COVID, supply chain. If a specific thing is written, we need to be able to get alternate solutions as well. So we bring that into it. And then going on to construction companies, what we need to do, not necessarily what we're already doing, is we need to invest in our teams and specialists to promote sustainability. Gone are the days when issued for tender set was given to us and we just bid on it and built the thing, and there were a couple change orders that went through, right? We're getting involved really early. We need to know what we're talking about. That doesn't mean we want to supersede the knowledge of the consultants by any means, but complement it, right? And provide that value add and that real complete life cycle through the construction of the building. Companies that fail to invest, construction companies that fail to invest in this, in their employees and this knowledge, will be left behind quite quickly, in my opinion. So I think it's a very deep space. Any of you attending this panel are doing, you know, your first bit on it. And I just, you know, I request that all the other construction companies give Ellis Don a run for their money in terms of investing in their employees and the education.
In terms of the contract models that you're using when you're working with the designers, have you been, what contract models are you using for those initiatives?
So a lot of our really big infrastructure projects that have these really strict performance and sustainability requirements are P3 design builds. So that, and that's a really common one we're seeing for the really large projects. Otherwise, we're seeing mostly CM type contracts. We really don't do much lump sum anymore. If we do, it's kind of condo residential style stuff that generally has pretty low targets. So we're seeing everything move towards getting us involved much earlier.
Yeah. One of the things I've been exposed to is a model where up front in the design, they actually invited three different, well, they pre-qualified contractors, and the three pre-qualified contractors followed the team in the design. So they were able to give their input. And then when the job went out to tender, those three pre-qualified contractors could bid. So they did a team effort. And it's the first time I've seen that model actually used, but it led to a project where at the time of tender, they were able to troubleshoot problems that the contractors and subcontractors were having in the industry. And they did it where they were all on the same page. They agreed that, hey, this is a big problem. We need to address this up front in the design. So it's a very transparent process. So we're looking forward to following that project and seeing how the results transpire on that. I saw there was one other question. Did you guys see what the second question was there?
There's a couple more. I think we're not going to have time in the minute left, though.
Oh boy, I didn't realize how fast this time's gone by. Okay, well, at this point of time, I would like to encourage each and every company to become a green ambassador and or come and join our environmental team at the Toronto Construction Association. We're very interested in knowing what you would like to hear and what we can do for you. We're also looking for industry leaders to join us in keeping the TCA members informed as we move towards net zero as this process unfolds. So I would like to thank everybody very much for your participation, panelists. You guys are awesome. I'm so excited to see how much has unfolded already, and definitely look forward to where we're going. And of course, any questions here that you're, tell us what you're doing. I've put email address on this screen, the slide that we have right now, and also let everybody know that this seminar will be posted on the TCA YouTube channel. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, Sandra. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.